And good morning from Philadelphia. Frank here with another episode of UFO News Network Sunday, coming to you on a Friday morning. And let me bring on my co-host, as always, Chant Hannah. Chant, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much. Um, we have a very special guest on our show. He's known worldwide, Alejandro Rojas, who is the director of Open Minds for operations for Open Minds Production, the host for Open Minds UFO Radio, editor and contributing writer for OpenMinds.tv, and MC for the International UFO Congress. He has also written for the Huffington Post and contributes to Den of Geek. So for several years, Alejandro was the official spokesperson for the Mutual UFO Network as the director of public education. As a UFO paranormal researcher and journalist, Alejandro has spent many hours in the field investigating anomalous phenomena up close and personal. Alejandro has been interviewed by media organizations around the world, including the largest cable network news agencies with regular appearances on Coast to Coast AM. He's been featured on the Travel Channel, Sci-Fi, National Geographic, and E! He also has Rojas Report, reporting on the latest trending news both in and out of the UFO community on various topics. Welcome to the show, Alejandro.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for being on our show. I wanted to start off with something really fascinating, and that is an article that you actually authored recently. It is titled "The U.S. Intelligence Community Insiders Got the Senate's Attention Regarding UFOs," which you wrote and posted on October 23rd of this year. And I just wanted to read a little excerpt from it. It says, "How the U.S. Intelligence Community Insiders got the Senate's attention regarding UFOs when they couldn't get credible data regarding UFOs in front of the Secretary of Defense. Two intelligence insiders hatched a plan to get the world to pay attention and succeeded." I did read this article in its entirety, and I do have some questions for you on it. But before we ask some questions of you, did you want to give us a review of your article and perhaps some thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, just in that, I think it's really important, and I don't know that the significance of what took place is appreciated. I mean, it's a game changer in so many ways. It really essentially opened a major door we've never had open to us when it comes to the UFO community or people interested in the topic, in that, it's been taboo. You haven't been really able to approach. Well, it's happened, but it's not common. But it's been difficult to approach the military or any government agency on this, but that's all changed. So much so that they're taking it upon themselves to look into it. And why? It's because, and this is what I think is significant, it was a whole plan that Luis Elizondo, who worked for ATIP, the Pentagon project, looking into UFOs, and Chris Mellon, who late in the game came in, tried to help Luis Elizondo get the information up the ladder from the inside. They were both unsuccessful, to Mellon's surprise, and they hatched a plan to use the media, to kind of use us. I wouldn't say use us as in, as far as the UFO community goes, to use us as far as, helping in an effort we already were participating in, but a little bit unwittingly. And I've joked around with Brian Bender with the Politico around this. If you read my story, a lot of the news, a lot of the really important things that happened, Brian Bender was the guy with Politico who broke those stories. And those were highly, highly significant stories, like the Navy claiming they take these things seriously, the Senate getting briefed on the topic, any number of items like that. The Senate Intelligence Committee taking up the case and asking for more information about the topic, UAP task force in existence. Of course, in the UFO community, there are a lot of people talking about these things, but Brian Bender was the mainstream media guy who was breaking those stories. So really important. And then it all resulted in exactly what their goal was, is to kind of do an end run. They couldn't get that information up the ladder, up to Mattis, and that's the Senate. So they went public, got the media interest, forcing essentially the military to respond. Fortunately, they responded in a positive manner, which then opened the door for justification for them to go to the Senate Intelligence Committee, who Chris Mellon worked for as a staff director for 9 years.
Yeah.
And they were able to get this incredible action. And right now, right this very moment is a really significant time for this topic, in that the Senate Intelligence Committee is reviewing information on this topic and what to do about it. And we've never been here before. And I almost feel like a lot of this is getting lost on those people who are really interested in this topic, while they kind of chase tails and chase red herrings and go on the typical wild goose chases that we're used to.
Well, that's par for the UFO community. I wanted to mention something about Christian Lambright, who is a very serious researcher in the UFO community, and he's done research for decades now. I wanted to read a statement that he made regarding this interview that I was going to read on air. If they gave the 3 videos to Elizondo originally, then someone gave the 3 to Mellon, according to him. And finally, NAVAIR, Naval Air Systems Command, officially acknowledged them on their own site. What videos did they withhold from me, meaning Christian Lambright, saying they posed grave damage to national security? I've even written to them to ask if what they released was all they had, but was told to keep waiting. So if those 3 didn't pose grave damage, what else is there that does? He's talking about the U.S. Navy's response to his FOIA request regarding wanting to know more information on those topics. And apparently U.S. Navy intelligence said, and it was, there's an article on, I think it was CBS or a mainstream media website, indicating that if they, being the U.S. government, gave Christian Lambright the information he was requesting by FOIA, that it would pose grave grave damage to national security. So do you have anything to say about what he's asking here?
Definitely. I mean, that's a really important part to this puzzle and the story of where this is actually headed, and the attitude that the military currently has towards the topic. And there are some recent pieces of information, especially from the documentary The Phenomenon, the interview there with Chris Mellon also, that is important, which essentially Chris Mellon is admitting that he's the one who leaked those documents to the New York Times and got those onto the stars. Lou Elizondo has previously said he was not the source in my interviews and others. So I think the history of these videos is also important, and part of some of the comments Mellon made around this. The history of the videos is not that they were given to anyone, but that they were retrieved. So these were videos that Lou Elizondo was aware of. Essentially, when they hatched their plan to go to the public, they knew they needed a strong press package, a press kit. They needed information, concise information about some compelling information to show that this topic is serious. They needed a case that they knew the military had taken serious, and a case that had hopefully some AV components, which the media loves. If you're going to create a press release, this is how you do it. You want to have some video. Lou Elizondo then, he requested the release of those videos and was able to get those videos. They're short, with not much information in them, and that's right. Partially key as well.
Well, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think Christian Lambright felt that there was some other kinds of videos that were being withheld.
So I'm getting to that. There's certainly, it does seem that there are other videos, but in the release of these 3 particular videos, Chris Mellon even said we had to bend some rules in order to make this happen. And so they were skating on some shaky ground there, which some people have pointed out. Some have been very critical of that.
I'm glad you
I
brought
don't think it deserves
that
that much criticism. But to your point, the other videos, all of the people involved, Mellon, Luis Elizondo has said this the entire time, and even Harry Reid has come in and said there are other videos. According to Elizondo, there's a lot of other videos. But the key is the attitude of the military, which Chris got, which is that the military did not release these videos. It wasn't their intention. They claimed that if they knew what would happen with those videos, they wouldn't have, cleared them for release. So They didn't want those, nor do they want anything released, does it seem like. All of their comments towards the UAP task force, towards their efforts, current and future, and findings, they say are classified,
I'm
that
glad
they're
you brought
not
that up.
planning on sharing. So what they've told Chris is, why are they classified? Because they pose a great threat. Why do they pose a great threat? Well, this is what we're really kind of butting our heads against, because in a way it's a justified answer in that what are they looking at? What are unidentified objects? They could be Chinese, they could be Russian, they could be from elsewhere. They don't know where, and until they know, it's incumbent upon them not to share the details of their investigation, because for many reasons, counterintelligence reasons, they could be tipping their hat that they know about technology that is out there. They don't want to do that. Typically, you don't let your enemy know what you know about what they have or what they know. There's all of these games. So it's a very delicate situation in what they can release. And I don't think they even want to go there. If they're like, why release anything? Because the potential for damage to national security is there. So we don't want to release anything. And that is the big danger going forward, is that if we want, as the public, for information to come out from this UAP task force of some sort, at least some sort of briefing to tell us something, then right now is the time to start asking about it. Because when their report comes out to the Senate Intelligence Committee, it's likely going to say, we've got this under control. This stuff is classified for justifiable reasons. It needs to stay there. Just let us handle it. And Marco Rubio, Mark Warner, the other guys in the Intelligence Committee, Kamala Harris, if she's still in it or not, may say, okay, you guys got it, you got it. And that's it.
All great points. And I thank you for that. One extra point I wanted to make super briefly about what you said as far as the grocery list of reasons why the U.S. government may or may not want to acknowledge anything under pressure of a threat to national security is they also may not want to acknowledge that they don't know. But moving along, I wanted to mention something to our audience and also ask you a two-part question. Christopher Mellon, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence in the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations, and later for Security and Information Operations, who formerly served as a staff director of the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, claimed, and I quote, "I received the videos, the now famous videos in the Pentagon parking lot from a Defense Department official. I still have the packaging. This is a case where somebody bent the rules a little bit, and they did so for the larger good, and we're absolutely all better off because of it," Mellon continued. Two-part question for you, Alejandro. Do you think more folks from the intelligence community will be so bold as to bend the rules, as Mellon put it, regarding the UAP topic? And how ethical or not ethical is it for someone of his stature to feel he had the right to bend the rules, or whomever it was that bent the rules, without fear of repercussions of any kind? To me, it sounds like it could have been planned. I don't mean to ask a leading question. If I am, I apologize for that. But, look, we both know that when folks in or outside of the U.S. government actually publish or post something online that is of top secret level, or possibly poses a grave national security risk to our nation, they can get prosecuted for that. So there must have been some kind of permission given. And if that's the case...
Not necessarily.
Okay. And I'm glad you said that, and thank you. Because it's a circular discussion, isn't it? If somebody doesn't realize that. If somebody doesn't realize that, not necessarily, like you said, which is true, then they're going to end up in a loop in their head going, well, if they're not allowed to publish this kind of stuff under threat of possible prosecution for espionage or whatever unknown kinds of charges, there could be a whole barrage of them, then why would they have been allowed to bend the rules? So what is your response to that?
It's one of those things. I think they weren't allowed to bend the rules. They took rules, they took it upon themselves to bend the rules. And there's a few different ways that this was done. Essentially, Elizondo going rogue, quitting. I mean, when you are told no, and he's a military guy, you cannot go up the ladder with this, done. It's typically a sir, yes, sir. They felt compelled. They felt it important enough to bend those rules. And the end run that Elizondo did by quitting and going public, he says he's not a whistleblower because he's not revealing anything classified. But he kind of is a whistleblower. He's revealing information that the Defense Department didn't want out there. As far as the videos go, an important aspect to those videos is that Air Force report where the Air Force did look into whether those videos were released illegally. So they already examined that. Who released them? When? Why? Is there a problem here? And they had determined that there wasn't a problem. Although it was strange because they, on the one hand, said they weren't cleared for declassification before the DOPSR department told Lou, go ahead and use those videos. So that was one problem. That was Susan Go from the DOD even admitted that was the DOPSR's mistake. They should have waited for that clearance. But on the other hand, the Air Force is saying they weren't classified anyway. And I've gotten via FOIA, and so have others, the email string between the Navy and DOPSR when Elizondo was asking for the release of those videos. And they said, essentially wipe the metadata off of them, which gives, details about the nature of the technology being used to record those videos, delete that metadata and go ahead and use them. They were fine with it. So they were unclassified, they weren't classified, so it's not as big of a deal that this information was released, but it wasn't completely cleared, for public release, and which is why this little bit of cloak and dagger. We do know that from Elizondo and others, we do know they've got some Confederates. They have some friends and colleagues in the inside, at least that were supporting them when they left. It seems like one of those situations where, everybody's asking for a volunteer and everybody steps backwards and one person's left there standing. Unfortunately, they really didn't come to have Elizondo's back as much as he felt they should have. And that's from my private conversations with him, really, that a lot of them got shy when he came out and he, received this avalanche of media attention. But one of those people was at least willing to stick their neck out enough to give Mellon those videos. We don't know who. So those same people, though, Elizondo has said some of this information that around what we investigated is not classified, but it's not mine to give, he says. Essentially, he's saying that I'm aware of other information out there, but those are in departments or areas where my friends and colleagues would not want that released, and I respect their opinion. And so all I can do, Elizondo and Mello have both kind of talked about, all we can do is try to compel those people to release that information, which may or may not happen in the future. But there's more apparently unclassified information as well as classified. And what the hard part is with these technologies, for instance, we don't even know the nature of the cameras that were used to video. We don't know exactly which camera, the make and the model, because that sort of stuff is classified. Because we don't want the enemy to know,
Sure.
the extent of our technology. So those are the issues that come into play.
Yeah, let me jump in here real quick with a question. You had mentioned Senators Warner and Rubio, and somewhere along the line, they had to be won over to pursue this through the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And do you know much about that process and how they were identified and how they were basically turned?
Yeah, a little bit. I do know, and that's something that Mellon shared with me that I also have in this article, and I think a big point that he wanted to get across was, he has no ability to dictate what the Senate Intelligence Committee does. His goal, and by the Navy admitting they investigate UAPs and take them seriously, it opened the door for him to share information, for him to start going to staffers, briefing them, and brief them all in the information. So, like he says, he was able to give them information. It was up to them to decide whether that information was compelling enough to prompt some sort of action. Fortunately, I think for us, for people who do believe that, this is a significant issue. They felt so as well. They saw the material and they said, "Hey, this is important. We feel like we should have been briefed on this, and we want more information on this." They felt like Mellon was kind of saying, as he felt this was an intelligence failure by not paying attention to these items, and they felt similarly. So the briefings they received did compel them enough to take it upon themselves to ask for this UAP report, to also, ask for a coordination of UAP research and compilation of information. Which is pretty significant, I think.
Go ahead and finish up, but I do have a follow-up.
I was going to say, I don't know the extent of the information they were given. Of course, they're cleared to see classified information. We don't know everything they saw, but we do know from Unidentified that they did at least hear about the Nimitz case and the Roosevelt cases that were featured in the Unidentified television show.
And what we're seeing from both of them, I think Warner, at least at one point a little more than a year ago, was a little bit proactive in terms of talking about it publicly. And we sort of knew that he was at least one guy who was definitely pushing for it. He's the co-chair, and obviously he got some cooperation. But Rubio had done an interview earlier this year with a TV station down in Miami, and he wasn't asked about it. He wasn't offering anything up. But when he was asked about it, he did, he was pretty forthright and actually made some very interesting comments. And Warner, as far as I know, is up for re-election next week. He'll be going for his third term. And as far as I know, he's not running on any kind of a UFO platform. This seems to be something that these guys aren't really sort of front-loading, but they will answer at least seriously if they're asked about it.
Yeah, and I think that's significant, that whatever they saw was compelling enough for them to say in those interviews where they were approached fairly recently, certainly I think in the red zone as far as campaigning goes for Warner, that they take it very seriously, that what they saw, we should take this stuff very, very seriously. Like you said, Rubio went so far as to say, not only should we take it seriously, I hope it's aliens. And
I like that response. I like that quite a bit.
It'd be very scary to know that they have technology like this. So you can tell they're taking it very seriously. It seems, and at least I know Mellon feels, and others, people like Brian Bender, other people who kind of have the pulse on the hill there, that they are pretty compelled to get answers, that they're not going to drop this. So they want answers.
Okay. Do we know if there's anybody more than just those two that are sort of at least behind the scenes pushing for this, or is that's all we know for now?
That's all we know for sure for now. There was another House representative, and I can't remember his name. He asked the Navy, wrote a letter to the Navy. Another story Bender covered. Wrote a letter to the Navy asking for information. The Navy essentially said, well, we talked to the House Armed Services Committee, so we're good. Essentially, we're not going to give you anything. We answer to them. He wasn't happy with that answer, but he didn't take it any further. But that was right before the Senate Intelligence Committee decided to do something. So he may have been tipped off, hey, don't worry about it. We're getting answers, and
that was a while back. That was Mark Walker, by the way. From
Mark Walker. There you go. So, fortunately, it doesn't seem to have had a negative effect on anyone's campaign, which is kind of interesting. And even 4 years ago, John Podesta was pushing for Hillary Clinton to talk about UFOs, and she did in some instances.
Yeah, if she was asked, and Podesta was pushing, ask her, and she would respond if she was asked, but otherwise, nobody's pushing it though.
But what's interesting about that is it does kind of indicate they don't feel that it is kind of the anchor or that it's going to sink their campaigns like it did for Dennis Kucinich in 2008 when it was revealed in Shirley MacLaine's book that he had a UFO sighting and he was made fun of, which ultimately was one of the nails in the coffin to his campaign, his running. Of course, he was an outsider anyway, but the point is that it doesn't seem to have hurt their campaigns. They are enthusiastic about the topic, and that speaks volumes. I think that's really important.
Those were great questions, Frank. Thank you. Wanted to ask you, Alejandro, was this a form, and you'll know where I'm going when I ask this question, was this a form of disclosure by the U.S. government when the New York Times writers Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helen Cooper wrote the story they did titled Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program in December 2017? The only reason I asked that question is because there have been some well-known folks in the UFO community that have studied the topic of UFOs and ETs for decades, and they felt that that one article was a form of disclosure. And others have felt that was just a sort of pseudo-drip, pseudo-disclosure kind of move on the U.S. government's part. What are your thoughts on that topic?
I think it was definitely a disclosure of some sort, a disclosure, and maybe even, and I think Elizondo argued it was the disclosure. It was disclosure. It was disclosure that they're investigating, looking into the topic. They've ran across genuine anomalies that they can't explain, that they take it seriously, and it is a legitimate topic. That too is essentially disclosure. The question is, the next step, which everybody is looking at, of course, is disclosing everything. But that's kind of untenable, and in a way justifiably, in that, kind of like we discussed earlier, some of this stuff is justifiably classified. And that's the hard part between what's classified and what's not. Mellon does make a point, though. He says that, he did not anticipate. He had suggested in an article, an op-ed on the Hill, that the Senate do this, that the Senate make inquiries, now that the Navy's admitted to all of this. They also put some verbiage or some kind of talking points to this on the To the Stars website to help encourage the Senate Intelligence Committee to do this. But they did not. And Mellon wrote, much of this research is in the classified world. It'll probably have to stay classified. So he suggested these briefings will have to be classified. He was surprised, he says, when the Senate Intelligence Committee actually asked for a public report, a public-facing portion of this. And he says, some of those people may balk, some of those intelligence people saying, hey, this is classified, how are we going to do that? But he argued, you can definitely do it. Every year you have to do this, because every year they have to provide public reports. And sometimes throughout the year, when a senator says, hey, I need to speak to my constituents about this project, it's a classified project, so I need you to distill a public, report for me. And then they'll provide that public report. So they have to, do the work to figure out, how do we frame this? How do we tell people what this is without revealing anything that's classified? So that is a regular process that they do, and that's what they're going to have to do. The extent of what they share, this is the door that's open. Now we can approach our politicians and we can say, we want more information. We want more information. It's a legit topic. There's even a location, a UAP task force working on this. We want them to share more information. This all enables us and empowers us to be able to get more information in the future. And that's kind of going to be the game we're playing in the future. Serious UFO researchers, that's going to be our battle, is, getting that information.
I'm glad you brought up UFO researchers, because I wanted to mention something interesting from a UFO researcher you are very familiar with, Barry Greenwood, and he wrote a thought-provoking book, reading the summary review of it, based on the government's own research and internal files. What they've learned about UFOs is a threat to national security, UFO sightings at military bases in the U.S., North Africa, and the Middle East, the cover-up role of the FBI and the CIA, the presidents, legislatures, astronauts, military leaders, and international scientific authorities who are on record as in favor of renewed investigation of UFOs. That was called UFO cover-up, but the government won't say. He had to, he wanted to make a statement to you just to find out what your response would be to it regarding this interview with you. He said he feels that the results of the Senate Intelligence Committee will probably be of the most general nature and not earth-shaking. What is your response to that?
Well, it depends. I mean, a lot of that is a matter of perspective. And I got to say, I'm a huge fan of Barry Greenwood's book or work, and that book is one of the most important in this field. I use it for referencing quite a bit, but it depends on a matter. For instance, just that Marco Rubio and Mark Warner are talking about this and taking it seriously is mind-blowing to a large percentage of the population, especially in Washington, D.C. In fact, it's probably mind-blowing to everybody in Washington, D.C. I mean, like Harry Reid said in The Phenomenon, he had a ton of pushback when he wanted to start these programs. And they were threatening on firing the guy he put in charge of it, he says. So there was a ton of pushback. For them then to say, hey, wow, this is actually legit, there's something to this. I mean, that's mind-blowing for a lot of people. It's not necessarily mind-blowing to people who are into UFOs or have watched some of the pulp culture or familiar with some of the mythology out there. But so it is kind of a matter of perspective. So I think that report will blow some people's minds, and I think it'll blow the right people's minds. It'll blow the minds we've been trying to blow for decades. It'll blow the minds of people who, Barry Greenwood's book, or if his book was in front of all of the right people, and his book probably blew a lot of people's minds. It'll do it along those lines. But I think it's right. For those of us looking for more information that is not out in the public, it might be, who knows, it could be very disappointing. We just don't know. I asked Mellon what he thought, and he essentially said, I'm not speculating, because essentially what he's doing right now is doing his best to make sure that those reports are as full and honest and as revealing as possible. In fact, they even said, season 2 of Unidentified, that's what it was all about, is to cover military case after military case to show, hey, these guys got a lot of records. So if they come out and say we don't know much, that's not true. They know a lot. They've got decades worth of cases that they've looked into. So that's the kind of stuff that he is trying to hold their feet to the fire on.
And just to jump in really quick with a question regarding that UAP task force report, it was announced not too long ago that David Norquist, was going to be the Assistant Secretary of Defense, was going to be overseeing that. Among some of his other duties are also he is the chairman of the Special Access Project Committee within the Defense Department. So he's got a few duties on his desk, but this is one he's also taken on. And, well, let's face it, we've got an election day coming up next Tuesday. There's a very realistic possibility that the current president will not be reelected. And if he goes, David Norquist and his boss, Mark Esper, go too. Do you see any kind of a change of the guard over at the Pentagon having an impact on the momentum that has been built up to this point?
Well, see, this is a kind of close game. This is kind of the details. I mean, there's so much going on in the Hill as far as personnel,
that's what we're here for.
opinions and feelings, and we just don't know. We have so little insight. So I think it's really hard to know. And I've asked, people like Mellon and Brian Bender, people who spend more time on the Hill and might have some insight into this, and they don't either. They don't know, because people, are if they have an interest in this topic, they're typically in the closet about it. So you're just not going to know what their level of interest is or how seriously they take it. So I just feel we don't have enough information to know what administration would be better for it. I think that Bryce Zabel made the argument in an article today that the people might want to feel more comfortable in the Pentagon and in Washington, D.C. to work with someone who does things in the manner that they're used to. So they may, and they may, shirk the chaos, but who knows? It's so difficult to know. At least I don't feel like I know for sure, even with all the people I've talked to, I don't feel like I have any more insight in what effect, Kamala Harris being on the Senate Intelligence Committee and then maybe being vice president or not, or Norquist staying or leaving. It's just really hard to say.
I wanted to bring up something interesting that well-known UFO researcher, Jan Aldrich, who's been studying the UFO topic of basically UFO data, compiling mountainous amounts of UFO data.
Another great person. I'm a fan of his too.
Yeah. A serious researcher we all rever and respect, and who's also a very, very good friend of Barry Greenwood's. And he also runs Project 1947. I wanted to read a few statements from him. They're slightly long, but I was going to read them in their entirety. Christopher Mellon, Jan Aldrich states, the May 2016 interview, he said he knew of no UFO investigation and he should know every intel activity going on. Later, the story changed. He did know about AATIP. In email exchange on current encounters, he admitted he was not aware of every intel activity, a more realistic assessment. Since then, the story of his official UFO involvement has mushroomed. This might be understandable, but it gives me problems. Then he goes on to say, I know of tangential item to UFO from active duty. The last time I checked, it is still classified, even though some was published. Because this happened, it does not give me the authority to talk about it. That being said, he's going on regarding Mellon. He said he knew nothing of UFO investigations. Then he knew about the AATIP. Then tried to bring it to the Secretary of Defense. How much further will this story go? See how far it has gone since his first interview. I asked Jan if I could quote him on all this. He said yes. As you can see, it sounds like he's just talking like he would normally just basically to a person. These are just notes that I took, so I apologize if they're a little choppy.
No, I get it.
Then he said, I'm sorry to interrupt you. He said, I'm not accusing Mellon of a lack of integrity. Let's be clear on that. As far as UFOs go, I believe the whole thing is an intelligence failure. Specifically, PBB treated every case as a separate event. Hynek wanted them computerized to look for patterns. Every UFO case that came into the Pentagon was sent to the CIA in 5 copies, and all message traffic on UFOs also was forwarded to the CIA. NSA got 3 copies. However, cases were periodically destroyed. How can you identify patterns in these kind of procedures? Since UFOs were already known to be foolishness, there was no incentive to do a good job. See also the UK and Australian intel docs for the same attitude. See Larry Hancock unidentified the national intelligence problem of UFOs and Swords and Powell, UFOs and government. Then he went on to say, Elizondo, I have big problems with this guy. He talks for hours without saying anything. Every time people start questioning, then it's classified. Reread the first New York Times article, which claims most of this is unclassified. He obviously is ignorant of history of the subject before his involvement. His excuse for this is not credible. Then he goes on to DeLong. DeLong, he is the arbitrator of what is relevant. No one with UFO community needs to be consulted. Why did the main Brace FDR sighting become so important? It is not an outstanding incident. Rather, it was not well investigated except for maybe the UK Top Cliff sighting. Then he goes on to say, in 1977, Bob Pratt asked the Deputy Secretary of Defense for public information about how UFOs were handled post-PBB. Just so folks know what he's referring to, that's Project Blue Book. Pratt was told they were recorded, but not necessarily investigated. My personal opinion, the reports were recorded and signed by a flag officer at the National Military Command Center, NMCC. Evidence for exist, he just said. Also, that gets intel out of the UFO business and turns it over to operations, which was discussed at the termination of Project Blue Book. Last thing he says here, I continue to believe that the government has more and better info than we do, but not necessarily the answer. As you can see, he went over a variety of topics. Do you have any thoughts on anything he said?
Yeah, I'm going to go backwards. So I'm going to go Tom, Elizondo, then Mellon, because Mellon's, I think, the biggest key to all of this. Okay. But, the last statement he said is something that you got to keep in mind when we're covering all of this. And that last statement that he made is very similar to the mindset of the people that he's kind of criticizing there. So I think when you put yourself in their shoes, especially him, he'll understand, I think, their actions a little better. So going backwards, Tom DeLonge. Tom DeLonge, although he has said we don't need to consult people in the UFO community, they are consulting people in the UFO community. What they mean is not like at large, not like the general mythology, or what as Grant Cameron calls it, the core story. These core stories, that's the mythology. That's the stuff that is down the rabbit hole, that is just nowhere, that serves no purpose in what they're trying to do. But while Tom DeLonge says this, he's also kind of like like a lot of the people listening. I mean, he's a conspiracy guy. He's watching all of the videos. He could be watching this interview. He's watching the videos. He's watching, all of this stuff. He's watching Jimmy Church. He's watching Richard Dolan. He's watching, all of these kind of people that we know who are talking about all of kind of some of the more fringe and really wild stuff as far as speculative what may be going on.
Stephen Greer.
How do we know this? Because he references it a lot. Yeah, even Stephen Greer. Richard Doty, who we know is kind of like, putting out false information.
Yes.
So he's following all of these people and creating his own narrative of what he believes may be going on around that. But at the same time, when you step back to the professional goals that someone like Elizondo or Mellon would have, that plan that Mellon hatched, there's only certain people. Should they have consulted Jan Aldrich and Barry Greenwood? Yes. They didn't, but I can tell you they did consult people who are fans of theirs, who know their work very well.
Let me jump in and say something nice about Barry Greenwood. When Tim McMillan got a look at that report from Bigelow's Bass organization to the Pentagon, Greenwood's book Clear Intent was cited heavily in that. Just so.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. So they are looking at people like Jan, people like Barry. They are looking at their work, and they take it very, very seriously. So, so I think that kind of, they may not have given him a call, but they like his work, type of stuff. When it comes to Lou Elizondo, I disagree that his reason for not knowing UFO history is not legit. I think it's very legit. I think that there is so much noise in the signal when you go out to public information regarding UFOs that I do think it's by far a net negative. I mean, if you take all of the stuff out there, all of the books, you're just going to get a lot of wild conjecture or just made up stuff that's going to be very far from the truth.
Oh, he explained it. He explained it early on why he didn't look at.
Yeah.
He just looked at what was on his desk, and that was it.
Tainted.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be tainted by any of the past. He wanted to look at the cases as they were, as they came across his desk, which is what he was tasked to do, and take them at face value. And the beauty of that is that doing that, kind of similar to, let's say, other people who worked doing this in the government, like Nick Pope or Dr. J. Allen Hynek, he found that, hey, this is legit. We've got a genuine mystery here. We've got a problem. We've got an intelligence issue. We've got a major, this is a major deal that we have to get escalated. So I think it's good that he took that stance. When it comes to Ben Mellon, what's funny about what Jan says there is I posed a very similar question to Chris Mellon fairly recently. I'm looking at this and I'm a little confused. And I mentioned the same thing. And he said, well, I don't see why you would be confused by that. It seems clear to me, but he's like, we'll talk about it. So he was out of town. But that's a good point. But by looking at it closer, and this is before I read my article, because I did get some clarification from him for my article. There's a difference between projects and work. He told me in my article, when he found out about ATIP, he was surprised because he didn't think there were any projects or programs going on in this field, meaning UFOs. There may not be projects or programs going on, and he did have access to a lot of them, if not all of them. And I mean, I think that people say that's unrealistic, but prove it. We really don't, and I'm working on that right now. I'm seeing if I can prove that. But so far, I really don't see any room for that. That would be a really big deal. If you can prove there is a project going on that is not under typical oversight, that is a big deal. That's a big scandal. That shouldn't exist. And if you found that, like I said, that's a big deal. So it's something that I'm examining closer. But there's a different, the UFO work that's been gone on, like they said, is classified, but it easily fits. And Elizondo even said this because this is how he got to partner with so many different agencies and branches of the military, because those people who were doing a little bit of work in it, these are embedded in other projects that have nothing to do with UFOs, for instance, radar projects or satellite projects or foreign technology projects. That's the job of the Foreign Technology Division, is to look at foreign technology, figure out what it is, capture it, back engineer it if possible. That's what they're doing. So these sort of examinations have happened before. People like Keith Basterfield, a great researcher, and others have been able to find, follow these threads as to where who's looking at these different UFO cases and discover some of those things. So he's talking about, and I'm going to clarify because I don't want to speak for him, but I believe what he's talking about is projects. He was not aware that there were any projects. How didn't he know about ATIP? ATIP is very, very different than a regular program. Everybody keeps getting on Elizondo saying, "Oh, this isn't a project. This isn't a program." And some are kind of saying it's more like a dossier. And I've had this conversation with Lou and with Nick Pope recently, because Nick Pope gets blamed for the same thing. And it's true. These aren't big programs or projects in that they've got a lot of staff and people on them. These are kind of dossiers. These are files of cases to look at. So they're not as small as just one person's hobby, but they're not as big of as actually official program. Beyond that, ATIP is a pet project of Harry Reid, a senator. It wasn't something that the Pentagon wanted to do or asked to do. It was foisted upon them because Harry Reid wanted to do it, and he wanted to keep it secret. So this is kind of an example of at least a program that was discoverable. You really got to give Bigelow credit and his whole crew, the people who knew, like Hal Puthoff or Eric Davis or Colm Kelleher, who had worked on the ATIP project and also were interfacing with the UFO community, but never let the cat out of the bag. We never knew that this was going on. So the secret was kept. It was discoverable, but just Chris Mellon didn't know where to look until he did find out. Somebody gave him a tip. He wouldn't share the details with me who. He just said it was early in 2017 he believed it happened, that somebody gave him the tip, maybe somebody on Bigelow's team, because he has worked with them. He was working on the UFO data project, which had some of those people. I think Hal Puthoff was working on that as well.
Yes.
Somehow he got tipped off to Elizondo, went to Elizondo, and decided to try to help him. And, he's very excited that it existed.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there was a few other things that Jan brought up that I failed to bring up to you. And I also misspoke earlier. I didn't mean to say how he would speak to a normal person. I meant to say how he would chat normally with a person. So regarding Jan and how he just gave me these rough draft notes that he sent to me. And I also called him by phone to talk to him a little bit about these topics also.
I do just one last thing on that.
Yes.
Is I do want to pursue that question further.
Yes.
So what I made were kind of some guesses and generalizations and how I understand things.
Yes.
But I am pursuing on nailing that down and getting specific answers to those specific questions.
Thank you.
Let me ask you this. Looks like Chant wants to move on a little bit, but I do want to ask you. Let me jump in here. And basically, Jan is pretty critical, pretty skeptical over some things that Mellon had said back in 2016. And do you think it's just a case of it's like, hey, that was then and this is now, and the ball is moving, and let's not look a gift horse in the mouth, or
No, I think that when I laid out almost exactly what Jan laid out to Chris, he said, I don't see where any of those comments contradict one another. And in looking at it, I can see it in a manner in which they don't as well. So I don't necessarily think things have changed, but I think that there's a lot of gaps there that it could be articulated in a way that clarifies that, and that's what I hope to get.
Yeah, so Jen had actually brought up two extra points that I wanted to read to you. One, we'll go ahead and start off with a little shade that he threw at Gordon Cooper. Jan said, Gordon Cooper, have people read Cooper's Leap of Faith? He supports contactee Dan Fry, a major embarrassment. He wrote himself into White Sands filming. Tom Tullian interviewed the tracking crew. They did not work for Cooper. Cooper was not in their chain of command. He was not involved. Moving along, you mentioned Bigelow earlier. I was going to go ahead and mention a comment that Jan Aldrich made about Bigelow. So I'll go ahead and start off with right here. It says, I don't know what Bigelow did with $22 million, but indications that some of it was not well spent. So those two things regarding Gordon Cooper and Bigelow. Did you have any comments on those?
Yes. First, Gordon Cooper. I wasn't aware. I mean, Jan's a great researcher, so I want to pursue that second part more closely. In other words, Gordon Cooper said he had a crew at Edwards Air Force Base that saw this, circular or saucer-shaped craft land and then take off. They filmed it. Gordon Cooper said he came and they told him about it. He looked and he saw in the film that certainly that was there. He didn't watch the film, but he stretched it out and saw the object, called a courier or notified his higher-ups. Courier came from D.C., took the film. He never saw it again. He's even looked for it, never saw it again. However, that's not the only encounter that he's shared. All the way going back into the 70s, and maybe even further, he shared another encounter that happened to him in 1955 in Germany when he was flying, training missions, and that he's in a group of jets flying one direction and a group of discs flying in a different direction very quickly. He says they chased them. They were on alert for these objects, stuff like this. Now, he shared that story a long time ago. So in his later years, did he start to mix things up or fabricate, or was his memory, messed up? That's possible. I certainly would not take that off the table because, unfortunately, there's so many old men who have had some, I've won a lot of awards, jet fighter pilots, stuff like this, who have, shared some just silly stories or stories that just don't make any sense. And sometimes that happens, unfortunately. So I don't know. However, when Chris Mellon did say it was Gordon Cooper who went to William, I can't remember his last name right now, but essentially Bill Clinton's Secretary of Defense.
Perry?
And what was that?
William Perry or William Cohen?
Cohen. He went to Cohen. And, that Cooper talked to the president, and then the president went to Cohen and said, and then Cohen went to Mellon and said, hey, go figure out what you can find out about this. We don't know specifically which event he was talking about. It seems as though he was looking for that film, but whatever it was, even if it was just the first incident, in Germany, Mellon says when he did make the inquiry, he was told to just get out of town and don't ask me again. So yeah, so who knows with that? That's an interesting thought and something worth pursuing. But regardless, whether Cooper's incident was real or not, it was the inspiration for Mellon getting into all of this. The Secretary of Defense asking him to research something on this. And that was like in the 90s.
That it inspired him.
When it comes to Bigelow and the spending of the money, I don't know. I think that would be debatable. He spent some with MUFON, and I was, MUFON spokesperson at the time that project went on, and we didn't know, we thought the money came from Bigelow. We didn't know exactly where it did come from. And it's funny that, we were essentially working on ATIP without knowing about it. So was that money well spent? I think that while there were a handful of good cases that resulted from that cooperation, there was a lot of, it was a trial effort that failed. Eventually, it didn't get extended because it didn't work. My opinion of why it failed is just that you're asking too much of these volunteers, these people who are trying to work 40 hours a day, take care of their families, and then you want them to go do these major investigations on fly, at a moment's notice all around the country. Those were the logistics that didn't work with it. So was that money not well spent? I don't know. I think that's highly debatable. And I think an argument can be made that wasn't necessarily the case. And even if it was, that 22 million was not all that was spent. Bigelow had to reach into his own pockets and spend more money on the project. So
I wanted to move along to a really fascinating topic that I actually wanted to get some, hopefully, deep insight from you on, or at least your thought processes on it. TTSA, which is a company that is a public benefits corporation established in 2017. I went ahead and looked them up on the SEC.gov's website, and I wanted to read to you a little bit about them regarding what is stated on the SEC.gov's website currently this year. It says, our mission is to be a vehicle for change by inspiring a newfound appreciation and understanding of the profound yet unresolved mysteries of the universe that can have a positive impact on humanity. We are working to achieve our mission via an entertainment, science, and aerospace consortium that inspires and collaborates with global citizens to investigate the outer edges of science and unconventional thinking in order to push human knowledge and capability forward. Results of operation: the company is currently organized as two separate divisions, the Entertainment Division and the Science and Technology Division. Our public benefit purpose is a unifying factor across our divisions. Currently, only one of our divisions, the Entertainment Division, receives revenue. TTS creates and licenses original content across a variety of media platforms, including music, books, movies, and television. TTS also manufactures brand-related novelty merchandise, primarily sold directly to consumer within its own e-commerce and retail channels. Existing products may be found at a certain website that it states right there. Now, I wanted to read something interesting to you. When I went ahead and read further on the SEC.gov's website regarding TTSA, their financial state, their SEC filing shows $53 million into and out of their capital account, which means that they have a capital account deficit of $53 million. Further, it states that in August of 2018, which is a separate topic, the company entered into 2 statements of work with Earth Tech International, also known as ETI, to prepare plans, perform scientific analysis, and advise the company on materials analysis and beamed energy propulsion launch systems. ETI's founder and president is company director Harold E. Putoff. These projects total $60,000, of which $12,500 and $30,000 has been paid during 2019 and 2018. Respectively. In August 2018, the company entered into 2 statements of work with Earth Tech International to prepare plans, perform scientific analysis, and advise the company on materials analysis and beamed energy propulsion launch systems. ETI's founder and president is company director Harold E. Putoff. These projects total $60,000, of which $12,500 and $30,000 has been paid in 2019 and 2018, respectively. What are your thoughts on that, those 2 topics?
Okay, a couple things with that. First of all, I guess I'll answer them in order. That $53 million isn't real money. Okay. It's essentially stocks. So they value stocks, and they've got to value essentially, here's a lot of stocks worth $53 million that we're going to try to sell. So if they sell them all, hopefully it'll be that much. Until they sell them all, it looks as though it's a negative, but it's not really. I'm probably not being completely accurate in explaining that, but I have talked to accountants who understand that better, and it's very complicated, and it reminds me of why I didn't want to be an accountant when they explain this stuff to me. So it's very complicated, but it's not like what it appears to be as far as like they owe $50 million or something like that. Okay. As far as Earth Tech goes, Earth Tech is Hal Puthoff and Dr. Eric Davis. Essentially, it was.
Right.
And those were two people who were consultants who, were working with To the Stars. So essentially, they're paying Hal and Eric for their work through ETI. Although Eric Davis is now working for the aerospace company, so he's not even working for ETI anymore. And last I heard, ETI might be closing shop. I don't know. Maybe Hal is retiring. But I think his son worked on it with him. But, that's a company that Hal has been doing work through for years. So that's essentially how that works. As far as the viability of the company, that's the question, and it's an outstanding question. Who knows? Like they said, the only revenue generating section is the entertainment section, which Tom's in charge of. He's about to finish his directorial debut, this movie. It's something Monsters. Little Monsters. Little Monsters is a movie we watched not long ago that was really funny. But something Monsters, California Monsters, something like that, is this movie that, Tom DeLonge directed, and it's going to be coming out soon. There are other projects, books, there's a cartoon in the works. Even Unidentified was produced partially by this. So, yeah, so the entertainment part is the only one making money, so which is kind of difficult. I mean, and as far as the research side, there's kind of two parts to that. There is a viable aerospace company is what they want to be. That's why they keep talking about these technologies. And I even criticize them a bit that, when they tweet that we're working on this new technology, everybody's like, well, I gave you money to work on UFOs. What about UFOs? But what they're kind of haven't really explained is the deal is they hope to make money off of these aerospace projects in order to fund research. And it kind of explains why people were kind of bummed from the beginning. And it's like, we're not getting much information. We thought we were going to get all this research and investigation out of you guys. What are you doing? Well, what people didn't know is, there's only a handful of people, essentially, Elizondo and Mellon. And what are they doing? They're not only shooting the TV show for Unidentified, they're doing the things they showed that they were doing. They're working on this game plan, and that's why I wrote this story. This is what these guys have been up to. They've been up to briefing officials, briefing politicians, getting this up the ladder, getting people, government officials around the world up to date and up to speed on this issue, and making what has happened happen. They were laser focused on this plan, and we didn't know that. The whole time we're wondering what's going on, and we're writing stories, and they held their cards close to their vest for a reason, to accomplish what they accomplished. And I think what they accomplished is pretty extraordinary, just like my headline, that these government insiders were able to get the Senate to start talking UFOs.
Yeah.
Real quick, let me jump in with a question.
Yeah.
Are we going to see a season 3 from these guys?
I don't know. I had heard it was kind of skeptical that perhaps there wouldn't be, but then, Skinwalker was kind of the same. But Skinwalker has announced they're doing a third season. I think it's very possible. We'll see.
Did you follow the ratings at all? Because they started strong, but it seemed like they really nosedived when the unexpected happened and the NBA and the NHL playoffs popped up in August. And that seemed to take away a lot of the audience, and they really dropped off after episode 3.
The good thing is that it served its purpose. It served its major purpose. And its major purpose was to aid in that plan that I outlined in my article, which was to put pressure, media pressure, from multiple different angles on the military to keep them, keep this topic front forward so they would get all this attention to it. And in that manner, it worked. So it kind of served the major purpose as far as that plan goes. And the other difficulty with and reality when it comes to entertainment is entertainment. Typically, the things that get the most attention are things like Ancient Aliens, which is very speculative, if not bordering on, in some cases, dare I say, ridiculous. Sorry to some of my buddies who are regulars on that, but Whereas, the real credible, great stuff is not, doesn't get the viewership. For example, you talked about, I work a lot with National Geographic. I love National Geographic. They're like the last bastion of real science and real credible information regarding topics that they cover in their shows. Nobody else is really doing that. The rest is reality TV show stuff that is usually made up. That's make-believe. And especially in the last few years, we had a panel at the UFO Congress with a couple other researchers who worked on television shows, and we were all just, it came in to be just a complaint session about how we're complaining, and the producers just want us to fake stuff and lie and read their scripts. They don't care about the reality of these situations. They just want to entertain. So it's really hard right now to get the attention to legitimate research on television.
I'm glad you brought up UFO, the International UFO Congress, because folks, just wanted to let you know that the beautiful woman in the background that we see walking back and forth occasionally
Did you see her?
The owner of the International UFO Congress, Karen Berard, who is a very beautiful, kind, caring person and has a lot of responsibility, and that is to make sure that International UFO Congress runs seamlessly, which she does a fantastic job of, and I think she needs to be given a lot of credit for that, and so we thank her for that. Wanted to go ahead and ask you a question from Tom Whitmore, who's on the board of MUFON. He said, I want to know that if they start deploying Scout, would the civilian data go to the Pentagon?
Well, probably not.
Can we explain what Scout is first? Real quick, can we explain what Scout is?
Thank you.
It's essentially an app that would collect UFO reports. And I'm not sure what perspective Tom is bringing that question. Is he may be trying to say, well, MUFON's data doesn't go to the government. Well, they did work with Bigelow. They've demonstrated that they're willing to work with the government. Not that I say that's necessarily a problem, but really, to the stars, Chris and Lou have some insider buddies. But he has made it very clear, in my humble opinion, that they are not happy with Elizondo, that they essentially make up what I've written this article about how the DOD keeps getting it wrong concerning UFOs, and there's a whole record of misinformation that they've put out there where they've had to go back and say, oops, we were wrong. But they keep continuing to put out this misinformation. The last statement they put out about Lou, even though they have countered this, they've said the opposite many times before, is that he had nothing to do with ATIP, which is just a ridiculous thing to say, because we know from Harry Reid, who created the program, from the engineers who worked on the program, everybody related to the program says, yeah, of course, Lou's the guy we talked to. Lou was ATIP. But for some ridiculous reason, the only thing I can think of is retaliation. They keep making up these stories. So they're definitely not happy with him. I don't know that they are interested in cooperating at that level. So I wouldn't think so.
Thank you for your input on that. Dr. Roger Stankovic, National Director of of MUFON's Australia and New Zealand, and also a neuroscientist at the University of Sydney. He had a statement and question that he wanted to make to you for this program. He said, if these deeply seated SAPs do indeed exist and are funded by black budget money, presumably for the examination of crashed extraterrestrial craft, why are we not turning our focus to engaging more senators to launch a formal investigation of the matter? Alejandro.
Why are we not? Well, that's a great point. We should be engaging the senators. Who we're engaging specifically, or who To the Stars and Chris Mellon is engaging specifically is really important, though, because like the response was to Walker, hey, classified information, there's only certain committees that are cleared for this information. We're working with the Armed Services Committee. We're working with the Intelligence Committee. Those are the appropriate people to work with. So if you do want to contact more senators, those are the people that you need to contact, especially those on the Senate Intelligence Committee, of which Kamala Harris is one of them. And she actually voted to request this UAP report. She was on board with that. So those are the people that we really need to engage. And what do we need to tell them? We need to tell them that we're not satisfied with how the government's handled this. One thing the media has not pointed out, I wrote an article about how, we've been gaslighted for decades on this topic, and we have. When we go to the government and say, look, I've got a document here that shows that you guys had this UFO incursion over a nuclear facility and you raised it all the way to the top level. What happened with this? Oh, we don't care about UFOs. That's no big deal. Totally lying, making us seem silly when we've got the receipts, but ignoring it. And that's been part of my frustration and other people's frustrations, that we've got the receipts, but nobody cares. Well, now they do. And that's what we have to tell them. We've got the receipts. There are all these cases. We want to know about these cases. What happened in Washington, D.C. in 1952? What happened in Iran? What happened over Chicago O'Hare in 2008? These are sort of things that we need to, all of these, and they're called, if you Google, like, let's say, Keith Basterfield or Paul Dean, or even my website or Black Vault, and you look for the OPREP 3 reports, those are the reports that were high value, high intelligence value, meaning they're important and they're escalated to the top immediately. We do have UFO reports that are flagged OPREP 3. Those are the cases that we need to say, hey, we want to know what happened to these. Now that they're admitting they did look into these things, what did they find? We've got to tell them we want answers. And otherwise, like I said, they could say, military wants to keep it classified, we're staying classified.
From Chase Kletsky, who actually knows folks who are on the board of TTSA. She's a forensic specialist and author. She said, Alejandro has offered another real article from the inside. I know for a fact that he is a trusted TTSA friend and trusted with content most do not see until the information is ready for the public. He has an immense understanding of DC lawmakers, military apparatus, and how it happens, she put in quotes, which put him out front. This article should be read by everyone, as Alejandro demonstrates real and solid leads. He is known for amazing work, and his continued contributions and more valuable. And this is realized every year. I never miss what he publishes. By the way, Dr. Kevin Knuth, physics professor at the University of Albany, New York, and a former NASA research scientist, wanted to make a comment for your interview today, Alejandro. He also published a really fascinating paper on UAPs that was published by the Max Planck Institute. And this work was presented at the 39th International Workshop on Bayesian inference and maximum entropy methods in science and engineering, which was held at the Max Planck Institute, of course, for plasma physics. He states to you, I wish that Congress would commit to publicly involving scientists. Of course, I'd like to know more about UFOs. They appear to be able to move through both air and water unimpeded. Is it possible for them to move through solids? Has this ever been observed? I'd like to know more about the optical effects surrounding these objects. I'd like to see someone compile a catalog of emblems and writing that have been observed. I'd like to know how many UFOs are present on Earth at any given time. I have so many questions, and I doubt that there are answers. He made this statement to you. Do you have any thoughts on what he just stated?
First of all, thank you so much to Chase. That was like incredible. That's like the nicest paragraph anybody's written about me. So that was really nice. But as far as Kevin, I've been interacting with for the last year or so, and Kevin brings up, I think, one of the really important points in all of this as well, which I think is really maybe the most important, in my mind, matter right now, given that the Senate is looking at all of this, which is what are they going to do with that information? What are they going to do with the Nimitz cases where they're true unidentifieds? What kind of science and research is going to go on with those? Or is it going to be left to just die on the vine? And so I think those questions Kevin's asking are really important. And Kevin, opened my eyes to something else recently in a recent interview, which is that the Navy saying that they take UFOs seriously and have investigated them not only opened the door to justify interaction and questioning and holding our politicians' feet to the fire on this topic, but he says it also justified scientists to now look at this issue. And he goes over at the International UFO Congress, he did an amazing talk on this, and he kind of outlined it in detail. But that really you can't look into, when scientists are looking for projects to look into, you're looking for science to research. If something is not in the realm of science, it's not really researchable, or it's not real science. And UFOs was one of those things that was kind of caught in its catch-22. It wasn't science because there hadn't been a lot of science done, but because of that, it's trapped over here. Nobody can look at it or will look at it because it's not considered science, but has to get some science done on it in order to be considered science in the mainstream. But the Navy just saying we're taking this seriously and we're researching it then justifies scientists to check their work, to say, well, is there really something to this then? This is a scientific question at this point. And, we're both part of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Research. And one of the things I want to do with the SCU is start to advocate and ask for this sort of science to be done. Because, first of all, it should be done. It takes resources. The science that he's done, which is kind of speculative, looking at some of these questions that he asked, just those questions alone, I think are brilliant. Those are the things, those are the directions we need to look at. That's what science would look at, and that's where we need to go. So we need to foster more scientists getting involved. But scientists don't usually work alone on these. They're usually projects that are funded through universities or through government funding. And so we also have to try to encourage people to do that. And one of the things we need to know or need to request of that Senate Intelligence Committee is what science is going to be done. And will you, or demand what you need to do is give information to scientists in the public arena that will transparently research and investigate, the results that you all get. We need to ask for that and try to demand that. And that is certainly where we need to head, because Kevin deserves answers to those questions, and they need to provide answers to those questions. And that's really what we all should be focused on trying to get right now, is get that sort of information into the hands of some of these scientists.
Yeah, I want to jump in here really quick and follow up on one thing that Professor Knuth brought up, and that is he asked what, at least in my opinion, is the key question. How often are these types of really interesting, really significant cases where you've got a solid witness account, perhaps backed up with some remote sensing data in the form of radar or FLIR video? How often is this actually happening where at least our military is picking that sort of thing up? You would have to think that it can't be happening that often, but we're looking back. You had mentioned going back to the 52 DC case. So you're talking about, going back, let's say even to 47, you're talking about 3/4 of a century now. How often do these kind of things pop up for the military? It can't be, certainly it's not on a daily basis. Is it weekly? Is it monthly? Is it a few times a year?
Yeah, and that would be so important. Who knows? And those are the type of answers that we need to get at. And at the same time, let's say it is fairly frequent. You can see why they would be concerned about telling people that our aerospace is being, there are unknowns flying over us on a daily basis, and there's nothing that they can do about it. And I could understand why they would be hesitant to share that with the public.
Do you think it's possible that it is happening that often? It's not once in a while, maybe once a month, spread out all over the world, different branches. One hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. That kind of explains the ambivalence on the part of the Pentagon.
I think what you're explaining is more along the lines of what real deep insiders like a John Alexander or Chris Mellon are kind of saying. that things are so stovepiped. There's so little cooperation. Chris Mellon was actually part of that initiative after 9/11 to help to consolidate intelligence so they would work together. But still on this matter, it's like the old days where nobody's talking to each other or working together, which is kind of why the Senate said, hey, guys, we need a central location. All of you are doing your own thing here and there. You need to work together, and we need a central location, which is what they've created in this UAP task force. But they might not even know. So I don't know. They could have been open to a surprise when they get all these reports. And you know what? You had one here. You had one here. You had one here. These are happening like every week, guys. You know, there could have been some pretty crazy revelations. So it's so hard to know.
We have a couple comments from people that you know very well. Steve Bassett, he said, tell Alejandro hello, and that I admire his years of great research in journalism. And then also we have a dear friend of yours, and Karen Berards, who I think you've actually spent a lot of time with Phoenix MUFON, and she's the director of State Director of Arizona MUFON, Director of Phoenix MUFON, Stacy Wright. She wrote, Alejandro Rojas has demonstrated clear understanding of the subject matter that he writes about or reports on. He's considered by many in the UFO arena to be correct and concise. He does his research. His methods of networking have proven time and again that his resources, his logic, and his understanding of the key players prove to be spot on. This field of ufology needs more players like Alejandro Rojas to keep us involved with the scientific method. And then also just a comment from a friend of yours, Jeff Krause, director of SoCal MUFON. SoCal is Southern California MUFON. He said, he asks this every time I interview you, Alejandro. He said, same question as last year. Where's my $5? I know it was, he said, he and I were talking, so he said, I know, but last year it was $5. Shouldn't I charge some interest? Tell him I said hello, and when I see him in person next time, maybe he can just give me a new t-shirt. The last one appears to be defective as it no longer covers my belly. He wanted to just find out where his $5 is. There is a comment from Russell Asbill, former forensic investigator of Phoenix MUFON for under a decade. Here are a few questions. I'll try and keep them as short as possible. He said, in spite of the reporting requirements, do you think a significant amount of UAP ET encounters will remain suppressed? Have any policies been put in place to protect the careers of military pilots and crews that report an UAP ET incident? Due to ongoing media coverage, UAPs and ETs are common knowledge with people throughout the world these days. Why do you think governments continue to deny UAP ET incidents regardless of the number of credible sightings? Do you believe the new reporting requirements open the door to full disclosure by the U.S. government? Do you think actual full disclosure will ever truly take place? Do you think the military knows more about the UAP ET incidents and capabilities than it discloses to the civilian leadership of this nation? He has quite a few questions here. Did you want to attack a few of them? One of the last ones he asked, because I think he has, like 20. On the topic of reporting and disclosure, in spite of the Phoenix lights appearing over a major U.S. city, no fighter jets were scrambled from nearby Luke Air Force Base to investigate. Do you believe the government has detailed knowledge about the origin and intent of the Phoenix lights? Do you have any comment about anything that he asked there?
Let's see, I'll try to go through. Do I think they know what the Phoenix lights were? Probably not, caught off guard. Like you said, some people say there were jets scrambled. I don't know. I haven't seen anything really hard and concrete regarding that. But it doesn't seem like, it seems like they were caught off guard. They didn't know what was going on, or maybe didn't even investigate it. Even in 1952, when they flew over Washington, D.C., although there was an investigation done by Edward Ruppelt and Project Blue Book, they didn't really care. They just were more concerned about the public and their public perception on that one. So who knows? ETs certainly is not a given at all. I completely 100% disagree with that. That I don't think we have physical evidence. I don't think you could prove your case. We do have anecdotal information, anecdata, which Kevin says his friend calls it. But that data is not usable as far as scientific. It's usable in a way in order to identify a potential phenomena, which of course has been done. But then the investigation has to happen to understand the nature of the phenomena, which we really haven't even gotten to. I feel we've gotten some research and collection of stories, which I think is helpful, but it's really difficult to, you can't say. I don't feel we're definitive on that, nor do I have any indication that government people are definitive on that. TTSA isn't even going that far. I don't even know if Tom goes that far. But it's something worth looking into. But what they know or what they don't know is difficult to say. I think that they definitely know more than the public. They definitely will not, and I would argue cannot, share everything that they do know. For instance, let's say the unsolved cases, in a way, it would be irresponsible. And this is the hard part. I want them to share information with scientists, but how do you come up with a mechanism for that, especially if a lot of that information is classified and should remain classified? If you have an open case, you're not sure whose technology this case, whose technology, who it belongs to. Should you reveal that information when it could be detrimental, when it could be, information or data that is belongs to an enemy or something like that? If you don't know, maybe you really need to hold on to it. But maybe there are certain circumstances where the cases are so old, or the data that they've gotten is so anomalous that they can't really make a heads or tail of it. So that would be information to share. That's why this discussion needs to start to happen, is how and what can be released, because I think they need to release something, and I don't think they feel it incumbent upon themselves to release anything. But because of that, there will be certain things that will stay under wraps. So I don't think we'll know everything, but hopefully we have the door open to start to learn more. And I think right now is that critical moment where we've got to start to let our politicians know. We've got to let the government know what we want and what we expect. If we don't do that, then, like I keep saying, they could just say, military, keep it classified, you got it under control, keep on keeping on, and then we're kind of cut out of the loop. That would be the worst case scenario.
Okay.
What's the best case scenario?
I think the best case scenario is that they work with, I would love for some organization, if it's not the SCU, which is kind of a burgeoning group of people in the public, some other organization. I don't think SETI's the right one, but I think that but some other project where there's a group of scientists that they allow that in a transparent way, which scientists often want. They want to be transparent because, especially something like this, you want your work checked. That they are able to get information to a public-facing scientific organization, allow that organization to do some research. I would love it if Kevin Knuth was in charge of this group or part of the group. So Kevin can ask those questions that he has and get those answers, which enlighten us all on, starting to understand the nature of some of this, and pursue the fringe potentials. The idea behind science and what's beautiful about science is you're trying to prove the null hypothesis. So what Kevin Knuth and the others are going to do is try to prove these are not anomalous. If they are successful in that, we get some answers. And maybe we learn some things about natural phenomena, sprites, and things that we didn't know. But then there's also the potential that they don't, and they can't prove the null hypothesis, which then proves that something anomalous, there's some sort of intelligence interacting with us that we don't understand, and they can scientifically say, this is, our scientific stance on what's going on. That changes the conversation so greatly, and it turns, the whole entire world. It acknowledges that there are these mysteries out there, and who knows? Maybe we can discover that there are communications that somebody out there is trying to communicate with us in manners that we don't understand, that the scientists can figure out. I mean, The potentials are extraordinary.
Couple questions left, and also before the end of the show, wanted to include a little bit of interesting and fun information about the wonderful UFO that's hovering behind you in the background, because I myself would love to purchase one. But anyway, let me go ahead and ask these two questions from two co-hosts who actually run a great podcast called Wild and West Virginia UFO Paranormal Talk Show. And host Ron Lanham asked, regarding the nuclear incursions overflight of bases and alleged initiation of a launch state, with one case in Russia, at least do you think we can honestly say this phenomena represents no actual threat to global security? Did you want me to read that again? I can if you want. Okay.
It's hard to say. The problem is you can never assume a motivation unless you have, definitive evidence. I think that a lot of people would go there. Interestingly, the government of Chile has determined that. They're like the only government who actually had a meeting, convened a group of high-level officials in their government to sit down and say, hey, what's the deal behind all of this stuff? And when they sat at the table, everybody sat with the idea, with the knowledge that this is a real phenomena, and with the belief that they're being engaged by some sort of intelligence from elsewhere, maybe the future, just from elsewhere. And they determined that it doesn't pose a threat. The biggest threat is that they're distracting our pilots when they fly by. And they felt maybe we need to educate our pilots. Just don't worry when one of these things fly by. So far, they have been benign. They haven't hurt anybody. But otherwise, it's just really difficult to say. I think Elizondo, or I can't remember who uses this analogy. Elizondo uses one, but so does Ben Hansen. But the idea was, okay, you wake up in the morning, and there's footsteps coming from outside to your fridge and then back outside. Now, it could have been a friendly person who just came in and got a soda and left. But you're going to be extremely frightened. You're going to feel that you were in danger because a stranger came into your homes. Maybe your kids are asleep upstairs at that time. Yes. So those are the reasons that we have to assume, or at least that the military and defense are going to assume that this is a threat until they can prove otherwise. And, To the Stars gets a lot of flack where, they're making it seem evil and bad and this is a threat. Well, that's the perspective they're taking.
Well, that's a great analogy. I've actually used that analogy because if you think about it, it's a great metaphor because our skies are our home. They're part of our home. I know you know this. I'm just telling our listeners, it's really a powerful analogy because if somebody just sort of strides through your house and you're sitting there on your couch watching TV, you don't know if that's a friend or foe. And if it's not a friend and you don't know them, you still don't know if they're going to be friendly. So naturally, go ahead.
Most states legally you can shoot first and ask questions later in that situation.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So anyway, the other question by the co-host of Wild and Weird West Virginia UFO Paranormal Talk Show. Hypothetically, why do you think the powers forces tried to the UAP topic over and over for decades until their hand was forced? Would it not have been made for better optics going public sooner?
I don't know. In some ways, I feel that it would. But then again, that's what the Navy's kind of done. The Navy did get in front of the whole situation, and they, which is awesome. I mean, the first time I interviewed Kevin Day at the International UFO Congress, he was emotional about it. He was so proud of the Navy for having done this. And he felt, like they really backed him and the other witnesses. And he appreciated that. And I think everybody does. It's kind of funny because the Navy has also been the most secretive over the last few decades. They've shared practically nothing regarding their UAP research over the last few years, even though we've gotten a lot from a lot of different other agencies. But they were in front of this. So it did help them, I think, in their public relations to a degree. Now it seems like they're a little more hesitant about it in that they're calling Elizondo into question and saying all of this is classified and it's remaining classified. So they're not kind of following up with more openness, unfortunately. But maybe that might have been a good tactic. But it's, it is a really difficult topic. I mean, it's really difficult. If you were working for the Air Force, you were the PR guy or something, would you want to reveal that you don't know? I'm kind of there's stuff I don't know, so I may feel differently if I was in that position, but I'm certainly someone who likes to share and would try to figure out some way to share. And hopefully that's the stage we're moving into, where they're going to have to figure out some way to share more information with all of us. But I can understand it. It's a really tough topic, especially with incursions over nuclear sites. I mean, to think that our nukes might not be safe, that's pretty scary.
That's a good point. And I know that is an entire talk show, which Frank and I have had before, talking about the topic on multiple talk shows. Wanted to bring up something interesting very fast before we end the show, and that is a fascinating document that I found in the CIA archives about witnesses of a UFO craft in the sky. I think it was during the 50s, and they were actually interrogated afterwards about those sightings. And it was Kehoe, Major Kehoe, who was persisting in his effort to find out if a CIA agent had interrogated any of these folks regarding unidentified flying objects. And it says that, this was in March 1953. And it says here that when Kehoe inquired about it, that the U.S. Air Force does not have any kind of security involved regarding the harassment of UFO witnesses. So I just wanted to bring that up to you. I thought that was a really fascinating document. You were talking about how the U.S. Navy had not, that they've been very quiet about it. And it just reminded me of that document, I guess because they've been quiet, but according to some folks around the world, they feel that they've been interrogated by the U.S. government, various factions of the U.S. government, who, according to them, were not quiet. They actually were interrogated for hours about UFO sightings that they felt that they may have had, and they regret reporting. Moving along, one last question from one of our listeners, Robert Farmer. He asked, my question would be simple. Why don't you just spit it out, Luis?
Well, my name is Alejandro. So, I think
his name is Robert.
When it comes to Elizondo, I do know Robert Farmer. I think he.
Did I say Elizondo? Did I say that?
No, Luis. Why don't you just spit it out, Luis?
Oh my!
But that's what he wrote.
That's what he wrote. That's what he wrote. Yeah, I think it was just sort of a question for Elizondo, and I guess he's asking you, to sort of speak for Elizondo in this instance.
You're right. Thank you, Frank, and thank you guys for clearing that up. His question is for Luis, and he's asking you that regarding. I think you get the gist of his question, right?
Yeah, and I think I touched upon it earlier, and I personally feel it's totally legit. I feel that if Lou felt he could share, he would, but he's a very loyal person. If you get to know him, he's concerned with other people and his colleagues, and he doesn't want to out his colleagues. He doesn't want to share anything that they wouldn't be comfortable with him sharing. He's a patriot. He worked in the government for many years, working in counterterrorism. He worked, he didn't leave because he didn't believe in the country or his job or he had problems with any of his associates. It's because he wanted to bring more attention to this topic, which he did. And by being careful about what they say and what they reveal, which has allowed them to accomplish what they've accomplished, which is very substantial, I think. Personally, I think it's amazing what they accomplished. They accomplished more in 3 years than, the UFO research has been able to do in decades. Now, I would also argue, though, that what they did was kind of stand on the shoulders of giants type of stuff, and they certainly did. I mean, the Bigelow group and everything has been working on this. Hal Puthoff has been working on this sort of stuff for decades. So I think he's sharing what he can, and I personally feel it's important that he do be careful, that he does use some discretion, because if he's able to keep his buddies on the inside, he's going to have more influence with them as well. And he's hoping and he believes that at some point he will be able to influence these people to reveal information on their own, which would be the best case scenario. So I think he's working on this in a manner that we don't see, but it will hopefully be fruitful. I'm sure it will be, and fruitful in a manner that's more appropriate.
Right.
Yeah, I've got one final question before we wrap up.
Yeah.
The year has been a very interesting 2020. The news has kind of come in little floods and then slow periods. I think we're kind of in a slow period now. What are you looking for in terms of 2021?
I'm kind of looking for, one of the things that hasn't happened is the media picking up this story in the manner that they should. This story that I wrote, the media should be writing about this story. These are the pertinent stories, credible stories related to all of this that, they need to examine a little more closely. I don't think that, Tucker Carlson is being that really intellectual about the topic. I don't think anybody is.
In fairness, he doesn't have the time, though. TV is just, that's the nature of TV.
I would not necessarily agree with that because they can definitely, and anybody in TV can delve deeper into these topics. They're being surface. Not that I'm saying everybody's doing that in the media. At least he's talking about it, but it's still, I guess my point is still very surface. They really, and it's not difficult to ask the harder questions. And these are people who are talking about Washington. They're talking about the Hill every day. They understand how it operates. They know the more pertinent questions. How did this happen? How did he find out this? What did he think of that? Mattis. Nobody's even bringing up Mattis. That is the Secretary of Defense that Luis Elizondo is working for, who he is trying to get the information to. Nobody's even asked him anything. Brian Bender's one of the few. There's a few others that are doing, of course, Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, Tyler Rogaway, MJ Benayes, and Tim McMillan are getting some mainstream articles out there in mainstream media. But the big stories aren't getting out there. So what I hope to do at the very least is start to bring out some more of these stories. So I've been interviewing some of these key people, and now I'm trying to coalesce some of these stories. So the idea of the science, how do we get science involved? These secret projects, are there off the books? Are there secret projects that do not get oversight? How big of a deal is that if that's really going on? Are there examples of this, which I don't think there are? Are there examples of this? There are examples of rogue players inside the CIA. Kind of, maybe you can even say Hoover was kind of like that. Hoover definitely had his own secret projects. Are there these kind of things going on where different agencies have their own projects that they're hiding from everyone else? Those are some of the questions related to all of this that are the big questions that need to be examined, and hopefully I'll try to write some stories on that.
Yeah, you do it. I mean, they're not doing it is giving you the opportunity to do it, so don't complain too much.
It does, but like this article, which I'm really proud of, it took a long time to get all that information together. So
it's a great article.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to go ahead and mention to our listeners a few movies that deeply affected or influenced Alejandro Rojas, and that is, I have the list here. It's my, basically it matches my list. I know it probably matches quite a few of our listeners' lists regarding favorite movies: Close Encounters, 2001, Star Trek, Star Wars, Dune, and those were a few that affected you as a kid. And
I, of course, was a kid when those came out. And what's kind of cool is Douglas Trumbull, who is the special effects guru behind Close Encounters, 2001, Blade Runner, some of my favorite movies, and some of my favorite movies that inspired my interest in this topic. And it was wonderful to learn, 15 years ago or so, or 10 years ago, that he was really into this topic. And my good buddy Mark D'Antonio works with him almost on a regular basis. So that's really exciting that he's so into this topic. In fact, that might have been my favorite interview ever when we had him at the UFO Congress, and I got to interview him a few years ago.
Yeah. Mark D'Antonio, we have the pleasure of interviewing him off and on. He's a wonderful person, and really highly recommend folks check out his podcast. He does an astronomy-related podcast, and he's also opening up an observatory in Arizona, which I did just speak to him recently on. But anyway, I wanted to go ahead and thank you very much for having been on our show. And before we go, I wanted to ask where our listeners can get that wonderful UFO that you have hovering behind you in the background. Where do they purchase that?
Yeah, the other great thing that Karen does is she is able to procure some really cool UFO stuff. So if you go to ufocongress.com, click on the store, you'll be able to see all kinds of cool stuff, including this lamp with the UFO on it, which is so popular. And it's funny because I was doing one of these videos and it was in the background. And so then I was doing a video from somewhere else. And whenever I do a video interview or something and it's not in the background, I get all kinds of people asking, where's the UFO? Where's the UFO? So now I try to keep one in the background when I do these because people love it so much. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, we do love it. I recommend to our listeners to please check out openminds.tv and also Alejandro Rojas.com, where he has the Rojas Report. And we thank you very much for having been on our show. We look forward to having the privilege and opportunity of interviewing you again, Alejandro.
Yep. Sure do appreciate it, Alejandro. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And you know, these interviews where I created these stories, you can find them in the Rojas Report. So go to YouTube and check those out. You can watch me interviewing them. So
fabulous. Great. Thank you.
All right, everybody, let's wrap it up. It's getting late here in the East, and I have got to go to bed. So we'll be back this coming weekend with another fabulous show. Thanks so much. Have a good one. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.